Good morning, world. I'm Steve Rao, the host of Pod and Roku TV's World Edition. And on this show, we bring you news from around the world. We talk about innovation and what we can do to live in an increasingly divisive and turbulent world, politically, economically, as we are living in the midst of a global recession, coming off a COVID pandemic, with still COVID numbers going up in some parts of the country and world. And we want to begin today. We have a special guest. Couple of points today on the show. I greet you live from North Carolina, the 8th largest state in the union, here in Morrisville, my hometown. We've got revolution taking place in Brazil as 400 were arrested as rioters vandalized the presidential office, Supreme Court, and Congress yesterday in Brazil. They were supporters of ex-President Bolsonaro, very similar to the January 6th insurrection of last year, 2021. 2 years ago. We'll be talking about the insurrection as well. Kevin McCarthy elected as the House Speaker after a historic deadlock and 15 votes. My friend Wiley Nichols sworn into the Congress early that morning on Saturday. And a new coronavirus is spreading quickly across the United States. It's called the XBB.1.5, and it's the most transmissible variant yet. And an ongoing stretch of storms killed 12 people in California. Finally, the NFL playoffs are set. The Kansas City Chiefs and Philadelphia Eagles are the top seeds, and the Buffalo Bills with the New England Patriots. Tonight is the college championship. Before I bring in our guest, who's going to talk about Abraham Lincoln and other political topics, we're gearing up for the MLK weekend. And when I was in Washington last week, I was inspired as I ended an 8-mile run at the Lincoln Memorial. Thought back to a time when our President Lincoln, who in this lifelike memorial, very emotional when you see it, presided over a very divided nation. And he reminded America that we would endure forever and that we would have a new birth of freedom. I can only hope that we can get a birth of new freedom and democracy here and around the world as we talk about the divisive issues of our time. With that being said, I'm going to ask Mark Lee to welcome our guests, and we're going to jump right in, and then we're going to talk about those issues I talked about today in my opening to streamline the focus of the show today. Mark, thank you very much. No problem
at all. Definitely glad to bring in Gretchen Woolard. I hope that I pronounced her name correctly and all in that line, but definitely it was a pleasure to hear about Gretchen through some of my media contacts, because I'm one of those people that believes in having conversations with people on both sides of the political aisle and all in that space. And I do know that Gretchen has definitely had some works and some thoughts around Donald Trump and the future of the Republican Party. And she has also brought up the fact of the comparisons between Lincoln and Trump, and that Donald Trump has had some of the same political flaws that Lincoln exhibited during his administration, but definitely is a fan of even the possibility of Trump coming back into office and all along those lines. But I would definitely love to hear from Gretchen, and definitely, even though you and I are Democrats, we do like to have conversations around people that are of different political sides of the aisle. And I know that she is not the biggest fan of the Democrats, but I'll let her explain that reason and all in her own words, because definitely I am one of those people that is open to conversations and different views. And I'm glad to have Gretchen join us from the great state of Wyoming, a state that I've always said that I wanted to visit and have yet to had the pleasure of visiting, even though I hear that it is a lovely country out there with ranches and other things that are going out there that give it that wide open feel and all in that space. So Gretchen, glad that you were able to join us, and if you'll just share a little bit about your thoughts that you might want to share. And definitely you have a book out called Born to Fight, Lincoln and Trump. So definitely want to hear more about that book as well.
Well, thank you very much for having me this morning. And I appreciate all of the different views and what our nation is actually going through right now. Um, President Trump spent his administration fighting constantly a relentless American opposition while still accomplishing what I believe was his America First agenda. As a Republican and a historian, this wasn't unlike what Abraham Lincoln did, who battled literally the Southern Democrats' efforts to secede, the Southern Confederates. They wanted to create their own nation. At very divided times, of course, literally, the nation split in two. Today, we're divided by ideology, where two different directions, two different nations, where different, it is pretty much political party divided lines as well. But while Donald Trump has his detractors, he's also secured a very loyal, massive following for standing his ground on issues he cares about. Issues I would contend millions of Americans care about. And I believe he deserves an honest assessment of his presidency and its effects on our nation. The reason I wrote this book is when I saw some similarities in Donald Trump's first campaign and then unexpected election in 2016. And those initial similarities, and I'll just mention a few, they both won with less than half the popular vote. They came with 10-year-old sons when they were elected. They were both very tall. The book that I wrote has some of the things what I call fun facts, but it also includes many hundreds and hundreds of similarities that are deeper than that. But after his election, I also realized he came with a first lady who was just right off the bat constantly ridiculed by the press and the media and the Washington elites. And Mary Lincoln also was ridiculed all the time for the fashions that she wore. So those initial things got me to thinking, is it possible that President Trump has any similarities beyond those to Abraham Lincoln? And after 4 years of researching and writing, I realized I found a treasure trove of likenesses, hundreds and hundreds of similarities on many different levels.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One thing I was curious about, and I'm definitely going to bring in some of my other panelists as well, is that some folks would argue, and I might even be one of those that would argue as well, that both parties have been kind of, I won't say, well, I'll use the term, commandeered by the money side of politics, as well as by kind of what some people would consider the fringe element. We saw kind of what happened with the Speaker of the House and the negotiations with the Freedom Caucus, and some people would say that there's even been that in the Democratic Party with the AOC side of the Democratic Party. So I was just wondering, do you think that there is a fair statement that some of these groups that are power groups have taken too much of a control in the political system and all in that side? And I would say that both on the right and the left that is taking place, but I don't know whether you would agree or disagree.
Well, as a historian, I would absolutely agree. In history, there are radical elements of both sides of the aisle. Yes, AOC is radical left. There are also what others call radical right. But in Abraham Lincoln's time also, there were those radical elements. Abolitionism, wanting to get rid of slavery, was an extreme radical position. And it took decades for that to become the norm and to finally become what divided the nation. It escalated into that. And today, I would contend that what is so disheartening in politics today, and you touched on it, was the greed, the power, but it's not, you don't see it in these radical elements so much as you see it in the revelation of how deep the state is and how elements of our government are supposed to be unbiased, and yet they seem to be for one side or the other. They seem to be wanting to eliminate one of the censoring, squashing, crushing, getting rid of the political viewpoints of their opponents for the convenience of having their own agenda out there unchallenged. There are some elements of that, and that wasn't unlike Abraham Lincoln. There was no unbiased press in Abraham Lincoln's day. If you were a Democrat, you took a Democrat paper. Periodicals were Republican or Democrat, and there was very little it wasn't called unbiased. And the extreme division in our nation today, it's taken decades in order to become this divided. There is very little in the center politically that people can agree on. You are either on one side or the other. And that literally was how the Civil War played out. And everyone, even those radical elements, Abraham Lincoln had a difficult time, just like in our Republic and what happened with the House. I would contend that the deep state, those Republicans who were just automatically voted for the speaker, and then you have this segment. And I know all the media, all of the bashing, but as just an ordinary American, I appreciated that these 20 Freedom Caucus members used the power that they knew they had in order to accomplish some things that the people see the government as being completely disconnected. They're no longer accountable to the people. Government of the people, by the people, for the people. It's, as a Republican, we see it slowly disappearing. And even rhino Republicans, we call them rhinos. They're not real Republicans, just in name only. What Mitch McConnell has done in the midterms in actually actively working against Republican candidates, and that from a ordinary people's perspective, I appreciated those members of Congress, those new ones, standing up for, wait, we're not just going to vote for you, McCarthy. We're gonna make sure that we're putting some of the power, and we saw it, putting some of the power back into the hands of the people. And then Donald Trump came in and sealed the deal. He made it work, and hopefully everybody will work together. But Republican Party, it's like Lincoln said. He wrote about it. They're divided. They don't just lockstep together.
Yeah,
So.
no, definitely not that going on lockstep on either side. I know that one of the other things that you've talked about, and we've actually brought up on this show, is a decline into socialism and things in that space in the United States. So I'd love to hear your stance on that and the reason that you think that that's the direction that we're heading. And of course, I'm going to bring in one of your fellow Republicans, none other than Chris Greco, and see some of his views and thoughts. And he may have some questions for you. And I know that Steve probably does as well. But I'd love to hear some of your thoughts around the direction of the country. And if you could also share a little bit about how the nation as a whole is viewed. I know you're just one person, but in that Wyoming area, because like I said, it's a part of the country that I have not had the pleasure of visiting, but I do know that when I think of Wyoming and Montana, usually y'all are very independent minding folks in that district and in that area of the country. That's always the impression that I've got of that area, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. Is that is a correct perception or not?
Well, Wyoming is, we love Wyoming. We are the least populated state. We have more antelope than we have people. We don't have, our cities are not large. I think we have 500,000 people in the whole state. But we do pride ourselves on, we're called the equality state. I taught fourth and fifth graders for years, Wyoming history. And we have some incredible firsts as far as freedom and equality. We were the first to allow women to vote. We are a very red state. However, it's very difficult to become elected if you are a Democrat. And so we have this this unusual thing in which everyone is a Republican who wants to legitimately have a shot at becoming one of our state leaders. And so we don't really know if they are truly with the Republican ideals until they are in there and they start voting. And so that's one thing that we have to be careful of. We're not as red as one would think, because we do have some elements in our legislature which are moving us into a more liberal direction. We are the state that used to be of Liz Cheney. I don't think she ever really lived in Wyoming. She lives in Virginia. However, she was our representative until she, what Wyoming believes, she betrayed our state by presiding over the January 6th protest about the 2020 election. And what that January 6th committee, our perspective, has become was just, she talked about in her concession speech, and this may be the most telling, is she talked about freedom and the Constitution and standing up for it, but it was completely empty rhetoric. What Wyoming saw about the January 6th committee was as a fake narrative, as a kangaroo court with one objective, not the truth, but to take down Donald Trump. The picking and the choosing, and how upset she became whenever there were parts of her committee that wanted to reveal Pelosi's role in not calling for extra officials to protect the Capitol, and also her desire to take 14,000 hours of video and bury it for decades. Why not just release it so we can see what really happened? The collusion and censoring of big tech to hide what we want is the truth. Wyoming knew it was not the truth, and we told her that it was not the, and we told her in high style, she was not beaten, she was stomped. And that's exactly why we elected Harriet Hageman instead of Liz Cheney.
That makes a lot of sense. I know that Steve, you have any questions. Chris, go ahead. I know.
Mark, I have Ms. Wallert's website on my share screen, so she can. We can talk about that. I mean, she can put that up there. But I think it's important. A couple of things. First of all, I wanted to know what your what your opinion was of Liz Cheney. I think the bottom line on this whole thing with January 6th, calling it insurrection, whatever else, there is now a situation in Brazil that's happening that they are now comparing to January 6th. Bolsonaro's people have basically stormed the parliament. But the bottom line is this, is that, and I think Steve would agree because he's a lawyer, is that you have to have evidence. And the evidence is that everyone sits there and says they were Trump followers. Why were they how were they Trump followers? I'd like to know, because they were carrying a Trump flag and they were wearing MAGA hats. Well, guess what? I can wear a MAGA, I can wear a Black Lives Matter hat, and I can go throw stones at the state capitol here in Raleigh. Am I a member of Black Lives Matter? No, but I'm wearing a hat. So therefore, the press, would the press do that? Probably not. So what happened was I think that this was a peaceful protest that, I hate to go with the conspiracy theorists, but I think there were rabble rousers in there. And basically what happened was it just got out of control. And that's the way it goes. But there were other protests that were done by Black Lives Matter and by the Democrats. And, they sit there and they point out very succinctly that Trump said, fight like hell. Well, so did Schumer in front of the Supreme Court, used those exact words, fight like hell. And you know something? Nobody talked to Schumer about that. If they, and later on there were death threats against the Roe v. Wade people, and the Supreme Court justices and everything else. That went away. That was like a week-long deal, and it was gone. It was never mentioned again. This is bullcrap. The one-sided aspect of this whole thing But the Bolsonaro thing, they're comparing. They're saying Bolsonaro is the Brazil's Trump. Really, we're going there. I mean, so it's really an interesting situation. So I really appreciate the book, and I'm going to go out and get the book. But I think it's interesting. And Lincoln had his foibles. Everyone thinks that Lincoln is the greatest hero that ever walked the face of this earth. Do you realize Lincoln was not an abolitionist? And he wrote a letter. It's in the book. The History of American Catholicism, that says basically, choosing between secession and slavery, I choose slavery. I mean, those aren't his exact words, but that was the gist of the letter. I mean, everyone sits there and thinks that this Abraham Lincoln was forced into a corner and said the Emancipation Proclamation, which according to slavery was legal according to the Constitution. So he said, look, I bow to the Constitution. He said it in a debate with Stephen Douglas. He said it in other areas. So I think maybe you can compare things and foibles and different aspects, but these are men, and they have their ups and downs, and that's just the way it's going.
Sasha, Chris, thank you. Sasha, you have a point. Sasha Stark.
Yes, I'd like to, of course, greet him to this program. I don't want to rain on the parade of our Republican friends today. The only thing what I would like to mention is that according to a well-respected journalist's book, Woodward's, Trump took over Republican Party. It was a hostile takeover. It was admitted by nobody else but his son-in-law, Kushner, in interview with Woodward. And that's exactly what's happened. That's why today's party, the Republican Party, is at the crossroad. They have to obviously disassociate themselves with Donald Trump, who is just all over the place in legal and civil procedures. And once he will lose the first one, he will lose the second and third and fourth one. And it was already estimated that whatever capital he has left will go to the lawyers, and he will fight until the rest of his life. So this makes him an electable individual for a post of the U.S. presidency. Number two, I would like to mention that as a result of it, a Republican Party has to find its own platform to conceptualize and spell out ideals, what it stands for, dissociate themselves from Trump. Of course, it's a very risky proposition because they will lose all the so-called base, which is even today still controlled by Trump. So there's dilemma in the Republican Party how to disassociate themselves from Trump and not to lose the base. And this is extremely difficult exercise, and that's what Republican Party has to go through anyway. But that's the reality. That's where we are.
Sasha, I think.
Hold on a second. Gretchen had a comment she wanted to make in response.
Oh, well, I want to answer a little bit of that. First of all, Donald Trump isn't all over the place. A lot of people think he is, but he has a laser focus. And it's exactly that same laser focus that Abraham Lincoln had whenever he was battling the Southern Democrats and what they wanted in a new nation based on slavery. They wanted what they wanted. And because Abraham Lincoln was elected, they said, we can't abide that free election. We're going to go off. We want the nation that we want to have. Donald Trump has a laser focus, and it is on making America great again. He's always had that focus. The fact that all of these other things are happening is because he is having to battle these forces. And yet during his administration, he was able to accomplish a lot. Promises made and promises kept, and the American people realize that. One thing he did is the Republican Party is not, and I agree, there are factions in it. The Republican Party does not like to change. Teddy Roosevelt showed us that in 1912. Teddy Roosevelt wanted to take the Republican Party into a progressive, he was against big industrialists on behalf of the workers and the American family. And yet, when he ran for the nomination in 1912, the Republican Party did not give it to him because, even though he won all of the primaries, because they are the party of the status quo. They do not like to change. And Donald Trump, I believe, should be reelected. He should remain the leader of the Republican Party. He interrupted the Democrats' slow, steady takeover of traditional patriotic America by standing up and doing exactly what Abraham Lincoln did to the Southern Democrats. He said, enough. We don't want this type of nation. And that's exactly what it is. It's a battle between two different nations. The one that prevails is the one we will give to our children. And it's absolutely a divide with very little compromise in the middle, if any room in the middle. He revealed a deep state. He revealed rhinos. He revealed Republicans who were so addicted to the status quo that they were fighting against their own candidates. That's a revelation. Now, how we fix that is it's up to the people. It's up to those leaders who really believe the people still should participate in their government. He brought free speech back to America. He was the wrecking ball to the political correctness in which all of us thought, oh, after January 6th, can we even say the word fight? Well, yes, we can. Fight doesn't mean we're punching each other in the nose. Fight means we're standing up. It's what Abraham Lincoln did. And he had half the nation fighting literally. Now, when we fight, we're going to stand up and we're going to stand for those true constitutional rights. In fact, Abraham Lincoln sometimes disregarded the Constitution because it got in the way of him fighting. And he fought fire with fire. The Democrats were vicious and they were a tough opponent. And he stood up and he fought in order to defeat them. Trump showed the Republican Party how to fight. He was the example for the new leaders, those 20, that Freedom Caucus. He has been the example for how those of us who want traditional values, patriotic America, to prevail over the increasingly socialist elites ruling over the masses, those two different Americas. He has shown us how to fight, and he should be reelected. And just because he is the most feared Republican leader in history, except for Abraham Lincoln.
Gretchen, he is a very fearful leader, but I would like to remind you facts, nothing but facts. He's got impeached twice. He lost House, he lost Senate, he lost election. He lost everything, whatever is there to lose. I'm not talking about his financial dealings and everything else. Okay, it's all up to you to dig it. There are enough material exist for any curious people, and a lot of people who are undecided and will actually, this is a force which will decide next election, whether you want it or not. They have access to these materials and they will make up their minds based on all that. So all that together, and I mentioned maybe just 1% of everything what is available out there, that makes him simply unelectable. It will be a crucial mistake of a Republican Party to get him as the nominee.
Well, I think
it will be crushed by anybody, whether it's Biden or Kamala Harris or just whoever. It doesn't matter. He's unelectable. That's how Republican Party will lose.
Mark, we have time for a few more questions. Before we go to
Yeah,
the
Steve,
show.
I wanted to hear you if you had a question. I know
yeah,
Lee had a question earlier.
I'm not going to respond. I really thank Gretchen for being on the show. I disagree with pretty much everything she said, but as the moderator, I'm not going to get in and debate with her one-to-one. As an American, I respect the beliefs of anyone that has the right to believe what they want to believe. But with that being said, I want to thank her for being on the show. If there's any other questions we have.
Yeah, I've just got to jump in.
We have Dan Worthington, who's obviously a Gretchen supporter. Dan's smiling because I know that some of the people on the show, Gretchen. So let's hear from Dan Worthington.
Yeah.
Because he lives in your neck of the woods and he's a supporter. So let's hear from Dan.
Yeah, I'm from Utah. Actually, I think we were the first to give the women the right to vote. But I don't know. I mean, it could be Wyoming was very close. I have to say, that what Donald Trump's vision for America represented was political genius. It was going to reestablish America as a land of freedom, opportunity, and despite all the rhetoric of the Democrats and the deep state and all the dark money and the corruption that the Democrats represent, along with the Biden administration, who has historically taken dark money and is deeply corrupted. He exposed that corruption. It was covered up by the press, and then they cheated on the election. I mean, Sasha mentions all this stuff, and then they talk about this kangaroo court called a inquiry by that House of Representatives. There's no due process. It was all one-sided. They've lost pages and pages and pages of information. They're now destroying evidence because they know that all the evidence points to essentially a seditious political coup by the Democrats to upend this president. They use seditious strategies using the FBI, the CIA, and the other deep state players, including in partnership with the media, to seditiously harm this president and injure him at every point. You mentioned he's in all this litigation. Why? Because he's being attacked by his Democratic opponents who are controlling judiciary right now. Now, Gretchen, you're not going to like this. I don't think he should run again. I think he should get behind a leader with similar views that's electable, and it's not such a lightning rod. Someone like the governor of Florida, but I do think that his vision is supportable, and it's what we really need for America to be sustainable long term. Everyone prospered under Donald Trump, except when the Chinese decided to attack us with a virus to destroy our financial institutions and to destroy the world, basically for financial gain. That's when, and I think that probably the Democrats were involved in that. Look at Facebook, look at Gates, look at Fauci, look at the research that was funded by Obama in North Carolina for this virus. Look what happened when they funded it in Wuhan. I mean, just follow the money and follow the tracks. And this is just absolutely ridiculous, and a fight against all Americans. I mean, even your black community, Mark, was being benefited by Donald Trump. Everyone who's saying he's a racist, he was probably the least racist if you compare him to Biden. Biden is a known racist. Even Kamala Harris, which I said the greatest thing she ever did was outed Biden as the biggest racist that's ever been in the Senate. It's true, he is. And so, Steve, your Democratic Party is not something to be proud of. Their views are not something to be proud of. They have been a seditious bunch of monsters that have created treason on our country over the last 4 to 6 years.
First of all, having won 4 elections as a top vote getter in North Carolina with as many 1/3 of Republican, 1/3 Democrat, I have many Republican supporters. So I'm not only.
I don't care about you. I mean, I'm talking about the Democrats in general.
But
you're a nice guy. I like you.
Well, no,
So
but
let me end
We have our friend down under. Maybe we should listen to Shaquille.
Can I respond just to a couple of things before you go, Steve? So, first of all, sorry, Gretchen, I'm Shaquille. I like to interfere in your politics from time to time because you interfere in ours. For the international audience, your book is actually available on Amazon. I've just bought a copy. It's also available on Kindle. So if anyone wants to read your book, it is available outside of America. Oftentimes we get authors that come on and they can't actually get the books outside of America. Well, yours is actually available, just so you know, and our audience knows. I just want to say a couple of things here. Sasha, the things that you are critical of Donald Trump about that you say makes him unelectable isn't exactly new. These are known things about him. And I think that a lot of his supporters are going to say that's exactly why we want to vote for him, because we feel as though the big establishment has unfairly targeted him and gone after him. And, really, if you go back to 2016 and the lead up to that election, the populism that he was running on was, look at the elites, look at the hypocrisy, look how the politicians do whatever the hell they like, look at how the celebrities do whatever they want, look at all the political correctness. Well, I'm going to be the opposite of that. He was sort of a strong man for that. Now, of course, that comes with criticism, but he's been really harshly and unfairly treated by not just the media in the United States, but they ramped it up. They were protesting him in the UK. There were people saying that the Queen of England, the late Queen of England, should not host him, the sitting president of the United States. For what reason? Because they don't agree with his political views. So I think that sort of idea, and it's not unique to America, that sort of idea of populism and the elites getting away with things that the everyday person can't. I just think that's something that resounds with a lot of people. And again, with the UK, look at Brexit. People were sick and tired of being dictated to from this, the EU and that sort of stuff. They wanted control over their country. This was very much the rhetoric in the United States. When I went through the United States in those years, people were saying we're sick and tired of Washington telling us what to do in our states. So, Gretchen, I do actually agree with you. I'm not sure that he'd necessarily make the best president now, because you are sort of going backwards. That's my view, although I think he had a good presidency while he was there. I think if it wasn't for the coronavirus, I think he would have won 2020 without any question. I do disagree with Dan about Ron DeSantis, because I think Ron DeSantis is not tested enough nationally. I think he's a great person for Florida. He probably needs a little bit more experience before he makes a run for high office. But I do want to just come to something that I think is the crux of what your book's about, what you've talked about. That's the comparison between Donald Trump and Abraham Lincoln. I'm not really a fan of Abraham Lincoln's. I always was growing up through school. I thought, what an amazing man. He went down, he freed the slaves. He's absolutely fantastic. But as I've gotten older and learned more about American history, I have some real issues with the way that he went about doing things. I have some real issues with the fact that his own party, people close to him, said that, 10 years ago when he was alive, everyone hated him. And now all of a sudden he's, this sort of, historical legend. I think, he suspended habeas corpus, for example, in the United States. But also the fact of the matter is that when people in America say, we don't believe the South should have been allowed to secede. So if secession is such a problem, well, why was West Virginia allowed to secede from Virginia? But more importantly, if you think that secession is a problem, why exactly is the United States its own country? Shouldn't the United States say, oh, look, we should never have left. We should all be part of England. Now, one of the major reasons for the United States leaving was that they were sick of taxation without representation. They were sick and tired of being bullied and harassed by a British government they had no respect for. Well, let's remember that, just prior to the Civil War, the southern states were paying something like 96% of all the taxes in the United States. So I think that even if you take the slavery issue out, there were some real issues that the Southerners brought up, and those issues were ignored by both Abraham Lincoln and his predecessor, and it ultimately ended the Civil War, which I don't think needed to happen. And I think you saw Southern emancipists that were happy to get rid of slavery, that were talking about reparations and all those sorts of things, that were overrun by Northern abolitionists who just wanted to have their way. Please respond.
Well, I appreciate some things that you said, but especially about Abraham Lincoln. He is one thing about my book is my intention was to reveal the real person. I believe that American history has sanitized Abraham Lincoln. Perhaps that's what happens when a president is assassinated. But he was a real man. And he and Donald Trump both have facades that they present. Abraham Lincoln in public showed humility and carefully cultivated self-deprecation. He once said, if I'm two-faced, why would I be wearing this one? He could laugh at himself. He had jokes, stories, and they served, though, to cover up those things about him that just didn't work in public. His ego, his enormous ego, his ambition, and an incredible arrogance that he was able to hide from history. But you dig down and it is there. This is not anything to turn Donald Trump into something that he's not, but to reveal the real person. Donald Trump also had his personal faith and his empathy for those less affluent and for the common people. Those are camouflaged by his impulsiveness, his political incorrectness, and the belittling of political and media opponents that everybody cringes at. But we're talking about real people in real divided times. The book is called Born to Fight. And that is the critical thing. Abraham Lincoln and Donald Trump have similar flaws. Early in their administrations, they underestimate the depravity and viciousness of their opponent, and they both place Democrats and rhino Republicans in high positions of authority and influence, only to discover later that their hearts were not in the fight. Abraham Lincoln had McClellan, and just frustrated him to no end that McClellan just would not use this incredible army that he created and go and fight and destroy the enemy. It's fighting. Donald Trump, Fauci, and Bill Barr, and McCarthy we have yet to see, but it's a flaw. It's not an insurmountable flaw for governing a nation. But there are two different countries. There are two different directions. And having a fighter stand up and tell America that, yes, we still have those rights in the Constitution. When it's being discussed by the liberal left, it's empty rhetoric, because the Constitution has those things that, how many have read the Constitution? Here it is. It's this itty bitty little book.
I've actually got the same.
You have three lawyers on this panel.
That doesn't necessarily mean you understand the Constitution. It just means you're a lawyer. I supported and defended it. You know.
Let me just say.
It is a very simple document.
You know,
I know.
Right to petition the government for our grievances. The right to peaceably assemble. All of those are very easy.
Hold on one second.
You talk about McClellan. Now, he was actually trying to, in my opinion, I wasn't there, obviously. He was actually trying to maybe calm down Abraham Lincoln a little bit instead of making things worse in the South. But I just want to come back to this constitutional issue of January the 6th, because I hear Americans, the liberal left, the liberal media, and other people, even people that come onto our shows, talk about how this was an affront to democracy. But Americans have been saying that democracy is under attack under various presidents for 20 years that we've heard of outside of America. So there's nothing new there. But I do want to ask this question. If an electoral candidate feels as though there was something untoward in their election, what are they supposed to do? Is asking for that election not to be certified reasonable? Is that constitutional? Because let's remember that once the election is certified by the electors, there's no going back. You could actually prove it beyond any doubt whatsoever that the election shouldn't have occurred the way it did, or there was something that was wrong with it. But once it is actually certified, that's it. It's game over. So I would wonder why Americans, especially left-leaning Americans, are suggesting that this is an affront to democracy. If that's the actual process that you have, that's the reason why you have the ability to not certify an election. It hasn't happened, but that's why you've got that process there.
And that's the nature of our division right now. And one of the similarities between now and the 1860s is how incredibly polarized America has become. When one political party has the mainstream media, they also have academia, ideology in the public school systems and the universities, favors one of the political divisions, one of the sides, that has an incredible effect on the normal working of our founding documents and how it is supposed to be. And whenever every type of, we are conspiracy theorists, and one thing that Democrats and liberal left do is they label. And you call them racist, you call them fascist, you call them everything that you are, you label them so that they are crushed, they are censored, they are squashed. That's not really an American thing, but the American left resembles a lot of things in history. It's about history, our history, the history of the 1930s in Europe, in Germany. You can see similarities with that. And I know some of my colleagues who understand the American right will understand this. There are things that Abraham Lincoln came across that were completely different. The Southern Democrats seceded. Why? Because they were fighting for their liberty to keep their slaves. Hypocritical. There are things going on today that we are fighting for democracy and we want to shut down them. We want no due process. We don't want them to have a voice. We want to label it as insurrection. It was a walk-in. There was one person who was shot, Ashley Babbitt. And why she was shot, we don't know, because they will not. J6 didn't question anything like that. They weren't even going there. Liz Cheney was on a personal vendetta because of her hatred of Donald Trump, very similar to Hillary Clinton's hatred of Donald Trump. And why do they hate him so much? Because he stood up. Why did they hate Abraham Lincoln? Half the nation hated Abraham Lincoln. Why? Because he stood up and said, we're not going to let you have your own slave nation. You can't leave the nation. A lot of Republicans said, what can we do? We can't stop them. Abraham Lincoln said, we're going to stop them. They just can't do it. And it's standing up. It's our national anthem, stand up. And if we're going to be the land of the free and the home of the brave, we need to get braver people in the Republican Party to fight the socialist liberal left way that they are, they have the upper hand. It takes 2 years for truth to come out.
But
that's a travesty.
My closing analysis, I agree with you that I think that definitely as a moderate Democrat, I do believe that the party has been taken over by a way too liberal of a faction. But in my opinion, I think the Republican Party is doing it all wrong by, the best thing that could happen right now for Joe Biden, if he does run again, is, and the polling does have Biden beating Trump, and it's not even close, is the divided, what Donald Trump has done. Even Newt Gingrich, who is the architect of the modern conservative movement, has said that the Republican Party is in the worst shape it's been in for 60 years. If it takes 15 votes to elect a Speaker of the House, how will the Republican Party unite to fight on the issues that matter, even if they don't agree with Joe Biden or not? I think Donald Trump is, he had an opportunity and he lost the opportunity. He could have brought America together. He could have been an outsider. He never got out of the campaign mode. He was voted out of the presidency in an election.
And Biden has
COVID was
the
part of
country
that.
together, has he?
Well, I think Joe Biden has not succeeded in certain areas like.
No. Let's just be straight up. If you're going to say that Donald Trump should have brought the country together, has Joe Biden, in your opinion, brought the country together, had brought the unity that he promised in the election that he would bring?
He did. He was, as a former vice president. And let me finish, please, before we close out the show. I do think Joe Biden was successful in bringing the country together on a solid vaccination strategy. I think he was successful in the American Rescue Plan, the infrastructure plan. He brought people together on that. He worked with Tom Tillis on gun reform legislation. Shaquille, please be respectful when I'm talking. I don't like people laughing in the middle of my talk. I don't do that to you.
Steve, sorry, that wasn't me. That wasn't me. That was other people laughing.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to call you out. I'm sorry. But please, on the show, please don't laugh when others are speaking. It's just,
Steve, I think it's also Chris.
Well, it's disrespectful when you're on the show when you laugh.
And definitely go ahead and make your points. I do also know that Lee, for a while, has been wanting to ask Gretchen a question. So I do want to get to Lee before we close out in the next 10 minutes and everything in that nature. So if you have some more comments, go ahead. But I do know Lee has been waiting to ask a question.
We'll let Lee. But my thing is, I think that we can all go around the room and say that, one person wasn't successful. Yes, there were some good elements of Donald Trump's vision. He wasn't able to really execute that vision, and he was voted out of the presidency. Yes, I do think the media has been a bit unfair towards him. I'll agree with that. And I think that this whole political division where both arguments are from the extremes of either party has made it very difficult. Gretchen is going to believe what she's going to believe. Shaquille's going to believe what he's going to believe. That's fine. But I think we should get back to a point where we're listening to each other and the government can actually, move things forward. But that's just my opinion. But I do believe Donald Trump will be the nominee. I think he will be defeated. I do not think he will be reelected president of the United States. That's just my opinion. But anyway, we'll go on to Lee. Lee, what are your thoughts?
Okay, speaking about Steve, thank you very much for your words about listening to each other. Gretchen, thank you for coming. Now, I don't want to talk about Trump so much, but thank you for talking about Abraham Lincoln, who was probably one of the most talked about presidents and like presidents in history, how much he wanted to heal the country after what was a vicious civil war. So much that he had as his cabinet, his vice president, Andrew Jackson, and also how he treated the soldiers from the Confederacy, and compare that to how the January 6 people are being treated by this administration.
Andrew Johnson, Lee, not Andrew Jackson.
Andrew Johnson. I'm trying to think.
Andrew Johnson. I'm sorry. I apologize.
That's okay. That's okay.
Okay.
The Andrew part. All right. We're on first name basis.
Okay. Back then, you didn't choose. You didn't campaign and select. You didn't select your vice president and then campaign with him like we do today. It's pretty much selected by the party. And the party selected a Democrat, Andrew Johnson, to be Abraham Lincoln's vice president.
From the South.
Yes, he was from Tennessee, I believe. And it was just a slap on. It's not unlike today. Do we think anything? Does the vice president really? They're not as respected as perhaps they should be, and definitely not at all until we consider, or until it actually happens, that the president dies and then here is the president. Teddy Roosevelt, that's how McKinley was assassinated and Teddy Roosevelt became president, and he ended up being a very exceptional and strong Republican president. But again, the Republican Party is the entire dynamics of our nation has not been this divided since the Civil War. And I'll say our nation today is every bit as divided as the Civil War. There is no common ground in the middle. You say, well, Americans want freedom. They want families. They want good economies. And yet, where do we find any politicians working towards the good of the nation? Our Constitution is meant for certain things. The preamble, we were supposed to memorize it, but this Constitution is to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. I would contend that the direction that the liberal left is moving is every bit as dangerous as where the Southern Democrats were in seceding from the Union. They want their kind of nation, and they are battling to do it. And they are exhibiting more National Socialist German Workers' Party techniques in censoring and crushing, using the FBI and the IRS and the CIA and all of that as the strong arm of their party. What is the truth? We don't find out for 2 years. That gives the Democrats an incredible advantage because the burden of proof is on Republicans. There's two narratives. Well, there's a narrative and then there's the truth. That's what we have to get to. But Abraham Lincoln used whatever was at what he thought would help him win the war. That was his laser focus, to make America great again, he actually had to conquer the Southern Democrats, and then he could unify the nation and bring it back together. So the division today is not, I don't think, any less serious for the future of America as it was to Abraham Lincoln.
Gretchen, I know we're getting ready to wind down, and I know Sasha's got a point to make as well. But as we wind down, I did have a couple of quick questions. One is, I know earlier you had mentioned about history and the nature of history and all in that space. And I know that even if we look at some of the Confederate leaders, a lot of times we will look at their flaws after the fact. I know there's been a whole conversation around Thomas Jefferson and some of the leaders of the Constitution and what they may or may not have done in the way of slavery and in the way of some of their political faults. And we've even seen that with some of our civil rights leaders. Like everybody knows that MLK has had his faults, as did Malcolm X and a number of others. So I was just wondering, is that something, because I know that your book does analyze both the flaws as well as the assets of Abraham Lincoln, and I think Donald Trump as well. So is that something that we should be paying attention to, and all in that line? And if I can just follow up with a second question, I was wondering, because as I'm hearing you talk about a pushback against the establishment, I don't think that it has only been strictly the Republicans that have done that, or Donald Trump. I would argue that William Barber was doing that with the Poor People's Campaign and with the Moral Monday protest in North Carolina. And I would even argue that to some degree, Obama was doing that when he ran for office and won as well. But I was just wondering, can you see that there has been some pushback from the left as well against the establishment?
Well, there are ordinary Americans on both sides, and we see all the 24/7 news cycle. We see the political leaders, and they are, what they say and what he says and what he does. And then there's the everyday person, who I'm sure there are more commonalities with us everyday people than there are with those leaders in what seems like a government that is moving further and further away from accountability of the people, by the people, and for the people, we would contend. But yes, referring to history, Thomas Jefferson had slaves. We know that many of the founding fathers had slaves. And you got to take history. You can't just pick some little thing out and focus on that, because history is simply people living and going through the times and the changing of those times, and good things and bad things. But Thomas Jefferson, in writing the Declaration of Independence, it was much larger when he sent it to be edited by the people who were his co-founders, but he had anti-slavery rhetoric in there. But in order to fight the Revolutionary War, they needed the help of those Southern Democrats. They needed the help of everybody, of those, Southern slaveholding states, Georgia and South Carolina and Virginia. They needed everybody's help, and 56 men were not going to sign it if it said, we got to get rid of slavery first. It's one war at a time. Abraham Lincoln, if he did not conciliate to Kentucky and Maryland and Missouri and say, okay, we're not hardlining it against slavery. We're fighting this war for the Union. That's how it began. It was because of slavery. But if he lost those border states, he was going to lose the war. That was without a doubt. And it was, you can look back in history and decide, well, we don't know. But he believed that if he was hardline on abolition and against slavery right off the bat, they would have seceded and they would have become their own nation. So what a president has to do in politics and all of that, just do the best that you can, but you do it based on the wisdom that you see. One thing that Donald Trump has, he has that business sense. He has that lifetime of fighting, of being tough enough to be able to accomplish a huge success in America First during his 4 years in the White House, while he was being bombarded from all sides, because he's the one that stood up and said no to Hillary's America and to the socialist nation in which the liberal left still continues to go. Where have they succeeded? They want to destroy him, but every time they do, it's not successful. They just know he's this rotten creature, and they just can't seem to prove it because it's not true. The American people love how honest Donald Trump is. What comes out his mouth is what's inside his head. He's not three different people. What he says is what he believes, is what he does. And, we'll see. The primary for the 2024 election, if the Republican Party doesn't get together, it could be like Teddy Roosevelt, and it will be a complete loss for America and for the Republican Party if they do not allow the nominee to go through. But
Sasha,
It's 2 years from now, and a lot happens in 2 years, and so yet to be seen.
Yeah,
thank you,
Sasha had a
Gretchen.
point in
Sasha,
the
one
chat.
last point because we're over
Okay.
time. We're over time now.
We are out of the time. I'll just mention one thing. The Abraham Lincoln was not perfect man. We all know that. However, it's a part of history, and not just the United States, but the world history. He has its place. It's engraved in stone. Donald Trump is a different story. The history will make him once he will hopefully sooner or later he'll die. That's a fact. Okay, once that will happen, then history will create its own opinion of what Donald Trump is. And I hope, Gretchen, that if you search someone like Donald Trump, please read all books written about it, all the facts. Don't come with the shining crow, the Donald Trump, what a great man. Oh, MAGA will make America great again. Come on, this is not even half of the truth. It's not even a quarter of the truth. It's 1/5, maybe 1/10 of the truth. So please be objective. However, if it's your political inclination, and if you got supportive staff who wants you to publish this kind of book, then welcome, you've done your job. Thank you and good luck.
Sasha, just because someone doesn't agree with your view on Donald Trump doesn't mean that they're not objective and that they're not looking at the evidence and drawing a conclusion that's different to yours.
Steve, I hope you will be interested to find out and relate to Shaquille the idea to read some books which I can recommend. And you will find out how his very first order of television sets for his first hotel was done through Russian operatives, and it was not even a normal U.S. systems, but it was PAL-SICAM system, so they could convey everything what's happening in hotel rooms.
We're 2 minutes over time, so
Yeah,
yes.
we're
On
2
that
minutes
note,
over time.
my closeout is based on Winston Churchill's famous quote. When they asked him about democracy, he said it's the worst form of government except for all the others. So if there's anything that we can be grateful about, is that we can disagree about issues and still, I just returned from Washington last week. The Capitol looks beautiful. It's still standing. The business of the 118th Congress continues, and the American people can now decide in our republic who will be the nominees of their parties for the presidency of the United States in 2024. On that note, we thank Gretchen for being with us today, to sharing your views and opinions, and from our family to yours on Roku TV. We wish you all the best as you continue to begin your 2023. Thank you all so much. See you tomorrow. Nick, I'm going to jump on at 11:30. Bye-bye.